Well, how many people are here for the first time? Raise your hands. Quite a few. And how many people have been here for many years? All right, many. Well, up until this point, I've had to introduce many people who aren't here, who had been here usually, Father Benedict and Robert Stackpole. But the next person I'd like to introduce you is someone who's been here every year, and you know him very well. He's the pastor of Our Lady of Lourdes Church in Massapequa, New York. He's a native New Yorker. You've seen him on TV many times. He's got a wonderful sense of humor. Very happy to introduce Monsignor James Lisante.
Thanks so much for that introduction. Thanks to all of you for being here. A Saturday morning, Saturday day, you could have been anywhere else doing all sorts of things. You come together to pray, to reflect, to celebrate the mercy of God. What a wonderful thing that we have come together this morning on a beautiful Saturday. It was great to listen to the celebration of Father Benedict. He taught me in the seminary over 32 years ago, one of the best teachers I ever had, because he took important concepts and made them understandable, which is a missing piece in so much of our Catholic teaching. We got the truth, but people have to hear it and get it. Father Benedict could communicate that so well. What a gift he is to the church and continues to be. And to listen to Chris Bell talk about it. I know Chris many years ago. We used to get arrested together. But for good cause, for the unborn child, for the preborn. And, you know, my first parish was St. Boniface in Elmont, and Louise and Russell Bell. Oh, thank you. They're married 56 years? 66 years his parents were married. But if you met Russell and Louise, you'd understand Chris, because they're so good. You'd say, how can anybody be this good as they are as a married couple? I'm sure like every couple, they have their challenges, but to me as a young priest, they were such a beautiful example of the sacrament of marriage well lived, and the fruits of their beautiful marriage are in people like Chris. So it matters very much what our parents are, what they teach us, what we value, and Chris is one beautiful example of that. I'm going to say, too, by way of introduction, that it's great to be here with you at a time when I hope you're joining me in praying for the upcoming conclave, that never was there a more important time in some ways for us to pray for the engracement of the Church through the Holy Spirit, and that this is a really important time. A great time to celebrate what Benedict was. And regardless of what you may hear in some of the media outlets, this is a wonderful man, a holy man, a man who could write like nobody else. A man who embraced the truth, but quietly, to do the good things and quietly. You know, there was one example in Rome where a famous churchman had been living a scandalous life, and no one at the Vatican had the courage to do something about it until Pope Benedict got on there and removed the priest. Even though he was a powerful priest, where Pope Benedict saw wrong, he acted against the wrong, but he did it quietly. Do you know, since he became Pope, about once a month, he has moved against a particular bishop if there was financial irregularity, sexual irregularity, or any kind of mistake-prone happening in that diocese. You don't know about that, and I don't know about that, but the Archbishop of one of the nuncios said recently he does it, but he does it quietly and discreetly, but he has helped to change the face of the Church and give us back our sense of dignity in so many ways. But here's a guy who does the right thing, but quietly, so you and I and the media may never celebrate it, but be certain that God is watching and knows the greatness of Pope Benedict XVI. One of the good friends of mine who has been on the show a number of times is an actor named Jonathan Jackson, and he was an evangelical Christian for many years, non-denominational. And I always would say, Jonathan, he's on that show Nashville now, and he's won about 5 Emmy Awards. So I said, Jonathan, what about the church? Come to the church. Anyway, one day he's in a bookstore, and he picks up a book. He loves Jesus, and the book is called Jesus of Nazareth, and he picks it up, and he reads it. He said, Jim, I got about halfway through before I noted who the author was. He said, it's you guys. It's that Pope of yours. He said, everything in that book spoke to my heart. He said, maybe I am called to be a member of this church of yours. This past year, Jonathan Jackson became one of us. I ask you in these glory days of conclave and all the celebration in Rome not to forget that it's the toughest job on earth. To be the Holy Father requires that we not just pray during the conclave, but always, because I think we can sometimes in the glory of Rome romanticize that it is a cross to take that job for whoever gets it. When the word came through about the resignation, I was sleeping in Florida, and I got a call from Rosanna Scotto, who said to me, "Hey, what do you think of this thing with the Pope?" And I said, "Did he die?" And she said, no, we need you on Channel 5. He resigned. Can you imagine that? Maybe there's a chance for you, Father Jim. In that great New York accent there. I said, "Rosanna, nobody would want that job. It's the toughest job on earth. We all tend to romanticize things." I tell you, as a priest, a lot of us romanticize you. And by that I mean we think, oh, if they just change the rules and let us get married and stuff. And I went out recently to lunch with a girl I dated for 4 years in college. And all these years, for 30 years, I've said, oh, what if? It might have been. Oh, my God, what I missed out on. One lunch. Thank you, Jesus. When they were very young, my sisters Joan and Patty would regularly have me babysit their 5 children, and I know why they did it, because I would say, oh, marriage, wonderful, children, beautiful. Every time I finished babysitting those kids, I used to say to my sisters, thank you for reaffirming my celibacy. Let's not romanticize anything, but realize the challenges of married life, of being a parent, of being holy father, and pray for each other. I'd encourage you all, when you get out of here, to think about going online if you can. And I always tell you, please, hopefully listen to the radio shows we do and the TV programs. It's very simple, closeencountertv.com. And this past year was particularly interesting. Dr. Eben Alexander was a guest, the fellow who wrote Proof of Heaven, talking about his experience beyond this life and coming back to life, sure of the kingdom of heaven, sure of the greatness and mercy and love of God, that he hadn't been before until he died on that operating table. A Harvard neurosurgeon, so a man of science, but a man who now says there's no doubt in my mind about the life yet to come and about the greatness of God's love, God's tenderness, and God's mercy. Ed Asner, a wonderful old actor many of you know from Mary Tyler Moore and Lou Grant, was in not too long ago. He's 88 years old now. And I said, it says in my notes here you're an agnostic, so you don't believe in heaven? And Ed said, well, as I get older, I hope you're right. And slowly but surely, I think he's coming to understand. Although it shouldn't be so slowly, he should move quickly. I was also, though, struck by a couple of beautiful stories. One was a story about Martin Sheen. Martin came in to talk to us about his movie, The Way. And he said, you know, when I asked him about Charlie Sheen, his son, he said, you know, people make a fuss about his sinful life. He said, but whatever he is, as a child, I'm responsible. He said, when he was growing up, I was a rageaholic. When he was growing up, I would beat him. When he was growing up, I was an alcoholic who wasn't dealing with my problem. He said, so if Charlie is a mess, I'm the one who made him a mess. And I said, well, how do you cope with that? As a dad now, looking at the mess of Charlie's life, how do you cope? And he said, because happily, I am a Catholic Christian, and happily, I know the mercy of God. Just 2 weeks ago, we had Ellen Burstyn. Ellen Burstyn is an actress who's won the Oscar. Some of you may remember Alice doesn't live here anymore. She's been nominated a number of times. A great actress. But one of the things she said to me was, I've come to terms, at long last, in my 80th year, with the fact that at 18, I had an abortion in my 5th month of pregnancy. And I had blocked that out for a long time, but I realized every mistake I made in my life, every terrible relationship I entered into, every decision to take drugs and to overdrink, everything I ever did that was self-destructive was related to the fact that I took a human life. I killed my baby. And I said, how do you move beyond that? And she said, because I've also come, at the same time that I face my truth, to the knowledge of the overwhelming love and mercy of a God who always forgives, who always understands, and who always loves. I will always regret the loss of my child, but thank God we have a God of mercy. Many people this day will talk about the divine mercy messages, and I'm going to go a little backwards on that. And I'm going to say, for those of us gathered in the Bronx today, I want to focus instead on the woman who brought us the message. I want to talk about St. Faustina, because I'm going to suggest to you I'm going to suggest to you that Faustina is, for you and me, living in America in 2013, an awesome example of what we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to do with our lives, with our faith. Let me go through a few things I see in her life that I think should inspire you and I to not only leave being instruments of divine mercy, but leave, too, understanding and embracing this amazing sister we never had a chance to meet, who transformed our world with the messages of divine mercy. First of all, what I love about her is you speak up for your beliefs, whether or not you're accepted or not. It doesn't matter if people reject you time and time again. Let's not fool ourselves or romanticize what happens. She hears from our Lord Jesus. She has clearly this image she wants to present to the world of divine mercy. And wouldn't it be great if, having heard these messages and been given this awesome message to share with others, the church would say, "We're with you. You're terrific." She's considered to be instead a crazy person. She is rejected by many people, including her own superiors. She is told that this is impossible, that she's delusional. She is once and again rejected for what she has to say. But she keeps on keeping on. When you embrace the Catholic Christian message, do not believe for 1 minute that it will make you more popular, more acceptable, or help you to fit into society. Get ready for the major rejection. I like to say, and people get nervous when I call it this, we belong to a loser church. We represent the truth that the world may never, in your lifetime, in my lifetime, embrace. I remember interviewing Senator Jim Buckley, a wonderful man. I said, you introduced back in the early 70s this Human Life Amendment bill, and here we are in the new millennium, and it's never moved. And what do you think? Will this ever change? Will we ever see respect for human life? And Senator Buckley said, well, not in my time, Monsignor. He said, I'm in my late 80s, but it will come because it's true. And I said, what about my life? I'm in my late 50s. Not in your lifetime, Monsignor. But it will come because it's the truth. But don't expect that everything we believe, because we know it to be right and good, will necessarily be celebrated. Well, St. Faustina knew that too. She knew that if I have a truth, whether it's understood now or not, you know, she says very clearly in her diaries, for a while people will embrace what I say, but for a while no one will. It will be shunned. And you know, the church silenced her message for quite a while, until, thanks be to God, things changed under Pope John Paul II, Blessed John Paul II, who transformed, for many of us, that great message. It is never easy to speak our truth, but necessary. Some of you may or may not know Eric Metaxas, another guest we had on. He wrote a wonderful book called Bonhoeffer, and he's a magnificent man, a great, great Christian guy. Anyway, he spoke at the prayer breakfast last year. And he was struck by the fact that just before he got up, President Obama said, I identify myself clearly as a Christian. Mr. Metaxas gets up and he says, but here's my problem. If you're a Christian, shouldn't it be shown in your works? And if you will not stand with the preborn child, when you say you follow Christ, this is the Christ who said, but woe to him or her who would hurt one of the little ones. Better a millstone should be tied around your neck than that you hurt one of the little ones. So I got to say, Professor Metaxas says, how can we say I am Christian, but I'm not a defender of life? You've got to put your money where your mouth is, Mr. President. You know, we know about all the bishops that get us into trouble, but I want to talk about a bishop you probably don't know. His name is Bishop John Darcy. He was an auxiliary bishop in Boston, the center of so much of the scandal. And Bishop Darcy, as an auxiliary bishop, and then before that as personnel director, said, there is a sickness in our church. This is evil. It must be rooted out. It must be ended. And then they did what the church sometimes do. Hey, thanks so much for your point of view. Let's send him out to Indiana where we'll never hear from him again. But he never shut up. He was the first person to blow the whistle. He was a man who spoke his truth in season and out of season, like St. Faustina. And you know what else he did? A few years ago, Notre Dame, the great Catholic university, decided not only to have the president there, which would be fine, they're allowed to have the president, but then they gave him an honorary degree celebrating him. And it was Bishop Darcy who said, I'm the bishop of this area, which includes Notre Dame University, and I normally every year go to the graduation to preside, but this year I'm not going. I'm not going because it's okay to have the president, but it's not okay to celebrate a man who is without a doubt the most pro-abortion, militantly pro-abortion president we have ever had. You may or may not know, but we're up against something evil beyond belief. In Arkansas this week, thanks be to God, they just passed a bill that you can't have an abortion after the 20th week. Anybody here who's been through having a baby knows 20 weeks is well along. And yet in New York State, where you and I live, we continue to allow it through all 9 months of pregnancy. And how important it is that a Bishop Darcy, like St. Faustina, have the courage to say, you cannot, you must not, you should not cooperate with evil. Cannot do it. St. Faustina, whether she was embraced or not, spoke her truth. What else does she do? She realizes the vocation of every Christian person, every Catholic person, is to be an evangelizer. I think we have fallen into a bad habit of believing the evangelizers are the big preachers. The evangelizers are the priests or the bishops or the cardinals. Not so. Here's this simple nun, this Polish woman who was rejected by more religious communities than you can believe because she didn't have money, she came from the servant class, was not well educated, and yet she's a saint of our church, but she was rejected. But she never, even in her humble state, didn't know what you and I should know, that we are here to be evangelizers, that it's your job, it's my job to bring people to Christ, to share with them the greatness of his mercy, to bring them to the glory that can be the Catholic Church. And I love the fact that she, in her humility, doesn't forget how important it is to be that evangelizer, to share the faith, whether people want to hear it or not. We are called on to be people who invite them to that. Some of you know I've told the story before, but it's worth repeating. Even in our own families, we need to evangelize, because you know and I know that not everybody in our family is embracing the church. In fact, so many of you have said to me time after time, I love my kids, I've worked with my kids, I've sent them to Catholic schools, and yet they won't come to church. They won't practice their faith. They're not baptizing their kids. They're raising their children as nothing. And I know that hurts you, but I think the message of Faustina is you never give up on sharing the greatness of God. And I'm convinced that if all those kids and grandchildren of yours and mine, yours more than mine, let me be very clear about that, all right? There is no little Jimmy out there, all right? But that if they could hear, not about, the things they don't like about the church, but about the greatness of a church that says, the divine mercy is yours for the asking. The divine mercy is yours because God is so good, so loving, so amazingly gentle and forgiving, who loves you always and forever no matter what. I have to believe that message of evangelization could bring back so many of our young people. I mentioned to you it's a part of your family life as well as mine, and for those of you who haven't been here before, I'll tell the story again for those of you who have. I have two wonderful sisters. One is very Catholic, my little sister Patty. My sister Joan is unfortunately a lawyer, which is a problem. So she's very cynical, very jaded, very feminist, and when it came time for her young boy Jonathan he was just born and we were going to baptize him, she said, well, maybe we'll let him grow up and decide for himself. And I said, wait a second, are you going to let him decide if he wants to go to school or change his clothes or go to the doctor or eat good food? No. Well, then why would you let him decide this? You are there to guide and direct him to embrace the faith. You don't leave it up to him. You're the teacher. It didn't go well. It became the elephant in the room that we didn't talk about. She lives in Virginia. One time, my sainted Irish Catholic mother, 92 years old today, God bless her, 92 years old, she says to me, oh, you'll love this, by the way. Recently, I'm on my knees at my age, taking my mother's shoes off in the bathroom. I must have looked disgruntled. She can't walk anymore. She looks at me, and to pick me up in my disgruntled state, she says to me, you know, honey, you really are a very good-looking boy. To which I respond, well, you know, I had good-looking parents. And she says, had, I'm still here. Anyway, Joan's in Virginia with her newborn who's not baptized. The kid's about 4 months old. We go down together, my mother and I. We're not going to talk about the elephant in the room. One day, Joan decides she has to go out for groceries, but she doesn't want to leave us alone with the baby. To which my mother and I, as one voice, say, "No, you go. We'll watch little Jonathan." Anyway, my mother's playing with Jonathan in the kitchen, holding him and loving him, and I say, "Mom, I'm going to go downstairs and watch TV with the baby in the family room." Jimmy, no, at 4 months they can't watch TV. They're not watching. No, Jimmy, they don't watch TV. Give me the kid, Ma. Mom hands over the baby, I go downstairs, and I confess to you, I do the deed. I come upstairs. My mother is the gentlest, sweetest woman in the world, so kind, so good, but she looks at me sternly. And she says to me, "Jimmy, did you baptize that baby?" And I said, "Mom, I can't lie to you. I did." "That's good," she said. "I wasn't sure if mine took." When Joan got home from grocery shopping, looking at my mother and me, she said, "So did you do it?" Next thing I want to suggest, Saint Faustina recognizes that sometimes the biggest problems in the world, in terms of changing the world and bringing them to Christ, is us. And so the question I put to you is a question she writes about herself. Am I, in delivering the message of divine mercy, an obstacle to that message? Or am I someone who's an invitation? Do people, by looking at me and looking at my life, want to know the heart of Christ and his mercy? Or do we, in fact, by our choices, push them away? Nicholas Sparks, the wonderful author, I said recently, "You're raising your 5 kids in a very Catholic way. How do you teach the faith?" You don't, he said. You live it. And in living it, you teach them better than any words could say. And the question for you and me is, what are we doing to try to be people who, by our lives, actually teach the message? Because the problem here is, we can't teach what we're not living ourselves. You know, that's the problem our church has gotten into. No one in the world, no one, teaches with greater clarity or articulate ability the beauty of human sexual love, the sacredness of human sexual love, the greatness of the moral teaching of sexual love better than the church. But in these recent years in which we've been embroiled in scandal, we have been able to be, I think, in some ways misrepresented to the world as complete hypocrites. How do you call people to live the beauty of human sexual loving while you are yourself treating the great gift of human sexuality with such derision and sinfulness? And you know what? Some of those critics are right. When we don't live consistently what we call others to, we are the very hypocrites that Jesus was toughest on. If you look at the sins of Jesus as cataloged in the Gospels, you're not going to find that much mention of theft and apostasy and sexual sin, but you find 17 times Jesus saying, "Be careful of being a hypocrite." Don't call your children, your grandchildren, your neighbors, your friends to embrace a faith that you and I are not genuinely attempting to live. Are we going to fail? You know it. We fail every day. It's why Father Benedict can say, "Pray for my conversion." Because he knows it's an ongoing process, but can we at least say, I will be able to stand before my God and say, "You gave me a call, and I responded to the best of my ability by living authentically, and where I saw hypocrisy in myself, attempting to stop it." I know in some ways I repeat some stories, but the one I'm always reminded of for myself, I preach a lot about custody of the tongue. You know, don't curse, don't lie, don't swear, don't gossip, don't be negative, don't say prejudiced things. And one Sunday, I gave a homily on custody of the tongue, and always my nieces and nephews would come to my Mass, and then I'd take them out to breakfast afterwards, and I'd say to them, "No breakfast unless you can tell me what I said in the homily." And on this one Sunday when I talked about custody of the tongue and how you have to watch what you say, as I'm driving the kids along in the car, somebody cuts me off, and the words that came out of my mouth, you would think I lived in the Bronx. And after I curse and swear at this guy, there's silence in the car, and my little Anthony, 10 years old, taps me on the shoulder and Uncle Jim, what? Can I ask you a question? Yeah, what is it, Anthony? Uncle Jim, do you even listen to what you say in a homily? When we separate out the way we live our lives from what our call to the Christian vocation is, we become the hypocrites that we mustn't. Faustina says, am I the invitation or am I the obstacle? And I ask you, as I ask myself, that same question. What else is great about Faustina? I'm glad you asked me. Faustina, to me, is a great example of the fact that one life can make all the difference. And you may be sitting here today with your particular personal problems and burdens and say, look, if you know what I'm dealing with, I can't do anything special in the world. I'm perfectly ordinary, and the problems in my family and my job and my life are such that I'm lucky to function on any given day. And I think that we'd be missing a great opportunity if we didn't look at this life. Poor, uneducated, sickly, rejected Faustina, who nonetheless recognized what one life could do, and her one life has introduced millions of people to the awesome message of God's divine mercy. And what that says to me is every one of us can make that difference, that not one of us cannot be instruments of God's purpose. You may know, some of you may know his name, I wrote it down. Father Michael Sapako was one priest, a confessor, who listened to Faustina and decided she's not crazy. She's onto something vitally important. I will help her to get that message out. And the truth is, without Father, I'm not sure she would ever have succeeded in any way in getting the world to hear this message. One priest listening sincerely to one great woman, bringing that message to a wider audience, changed the world. And then an archbishop in Krakow, someone named John Paul II, comes along at just the right time and says, not only will this be some hidden and obscure teaching, but I will bring divine mercy through the gift of my office to the whole world. One life making all the difference. One life making a world that is now much more open to the possibility of knowing, sinners though we be, mistakes that we make, imperfect as we are, that we have a God who cannot stop loving us. I love the image. No matter how long and how far you run from the Lord, no matter how much you seem to reject him and race with all your might away from him, the moment you stop running and turn around, there is he with open arms. We are, every one of us, individually his instrument. Faustina proved that to me, as I hope she proves it to you. I must tell you, 20 years ago, when I was most active in doing pro-life work, I'd go around to parishes every weekend, talk about pro-life and family life. And I remember very distinctly a woman coming up to me, Valerie, after one Mass saying, well, boy, you were on to me today. What do you mean? Well, she said, I got 3 kids. My marriage is over. I got involved with this other guy who's no darn good, and I'm pregnant again. And everybody says to me, you can't afford it, you can't handle it, you got to get rid of it. Look, you've done your job, you had 3 kids, you can't have a 4th, you got no one to support you. Father Jim, I'm supposed to get rid of this kid this week. What do you think? So we talked, and we talked about all the choices, including the beautiful, life-giving choice of adoption. And I'm happy to say that was ultimately her choice. And I remember the couple, Mary and Charlie, who longed to have a child, and who was so uplifted that day when little Stephen was placed in their hands. This is now over 23 years ago. I'm giving a holy hour this past year, and a kid slips me a note and says, hey, can I see you? And he wants to see me to tell me, hello, I'm Stephen. And I know that over 23 years ago, you talked to my mom, and I know it made a positive difference. So I thank you for my life. I thank you for being a voice that needed to be spoken. And I want you to know that my Catholic faith means everything to me. I want you to know that I'm working as a campus minister on a college campus. I want you to say to everyone who will listen that the message of the sacredness of life can never be overstated, because every one of us is here as part of God's plan. Bishop Austin Vaughn, a wonderful bishop of this archdiocese years ago, said, there never has been and never will be a baby created who is a mistake in the mind of God. We might not think the timing is right or the situation perfect, but God knows what he's doing. And he made you and me for a special purpose. He made Faustina for a special purpose. You have a job to do that no one else can do the way you do it, and I'm asking you to think seriously, please, about the possibility that you can help to transform the world, that there are Stephens as yet unborn out there who need people like you and me to be mouthpieces for God, mouthpieces for his mercy. We have an amazing job to do. Let it begin in your own home. I'm asking you to go home today and to do, this will be your Lenten penance, to be more kind than you've ever been before, more merciful, more forgiving. I am sure there is someone in your family who has hurt you deeply, profoundly. What better time to take the mercy of God and to share it with others? I've often said that if you're in a strained marriage, then maybe the most merciful thing you can do is to heal it and to love and try loving and forgiving again. One time, you remember, if you were here a few years ago, my penance was even tougher than that. I said, if we're really going to celebrate the gift of human sexuality, go home and have relations with your spouse. I had people who said to me afterwards, I'll give money to the church, anything. Divine mercy is not some amorphous, incredible concept up there. It is real and lived one by one when you and I decide, as God has decided for you and me, to be loving, merciful, and kind to us in the same way he has been merciful to us. We must in turn be merciful to one another. My friends, God bless you. Thank you. And if you would just sit there for a second and allow me to pray over all my friends who are here today. Let's bow down our heads. Lord, I ask you today to transform your church into an instrument of your divine mercy, and help us not to see it just as the work of the church, but as my work and your work individually and personally, to forgive, to understand, to be kind, to be compassionate, to empathize with those who struggle, to love as Jesus loved. Has no one judged or condemned you, he said to the woman caught in adultery? Then neither do I. Go in peace and sin no more. May we have the same heart of Christ that allows us to be instruments of his mercy. My friends, the Lord be with you. And may Almighty God bless you and your families through the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thanks for listening. God bless you guys.
Well, the Lord is blessing us today, so he's asking us to keep our hearts open because he wants to continue.